911, what's your emergency?
There's blood. There's blood everywhere. I think she's dead.
Sir, where are you?
There's some kind of note.
I don't quite understand what it is that compels me to type this. I don't really understand myself these days. However, lately, I cannot recall when it started. I have been a victim of many unusual and irrational thoughts.
Late on July 31st, 1966, Charles Whitman, a loving husband and son, drove to his mother's house in Austin, Texas, and killed her. When he later returned home, he then proceeded to stab his loving wife 5 times, killing her too. After each murder, he left a note expressing his deep regret. Something had come over him, he thought. Something strange and awful. Then things got worse.
News tonight out of the University of Texas, Austin. A student, Charles Whitman, posing as a janitor, took to the roof of the campus's clock tower and began to open fire. 14 people are dead and twice as many injured. It's unclear Whitman's motive.
In his suicide note, Charles made a strange request. He asked that an autopsy be performed on his body. When doctors performed the autopsy, they found something surprising. A brain tumor the size of a pecan pressing against Whitman's amygdala, a key brain center for processing emotions and decision-making. Does that change your opinion of Charles Whitman? Had Charles lived, should they have taken him to prison or the hospital? Could it be that 17 people were killed by a single tumor in Charles Whitman's brain? This is obviously an extreme example, one in which it becomes clear the ways physical and biological forces deeply affect our actions. Would Charles Whitman have killed his wife and mother had it not been for the brain tumor? Is it even fair to blame anything or anyone other than Whitman himself for the actions he took? After all, it was his choice, right? Personally, based on the letters Whitman left, it seems unlikely to me that he would have done what he did had it not been for the tumor. And so, this raises a fundamental question, one pondered by philosophers and scientists for generations. Are we truly in control of our actions? Or are our actions simply the result of a long, complex causal chain that began long before us? Is free will merely an illusion? For Charles Whitman, at least in this case, it would seem the answer is yes. Many of you may already be familiar with the concept of determinism, the idea that the actions we take are not the result of free will, but are instead predictable, the consequence of an external causal chain. Think of it like a game of pool. If we know the state of all the variables at any moment, we know exactly what will happen next. The balls themselves don't decide where to go. Physics does. Similarly, Charles Whitman was always going to get a brain tumor, and that brain tumor was always going to cause him to murder 17 people. No choices, just one event leading to another and another, inevitably. Sure, you might be thinking, the actions of Charles Whitman were deterministic because he had a freaking brain tumor. But I don't have a brain tumor. I have free will. But what about your brain chemistry? Do you control that? Some of us are more prone to joy or anxiety or rage because of the chemicals in our brain. Sure, a tumor is the most severe version of this, but certainly your brain chemistry affects your choices. And what about your parents? You likely didn't choose them, but their actions, or lack thereof, certainly affect the choices you make daily, affirming or rejecting, consciously or subconsciously, things they taught you. Maybe none of us are that different from Charles Whitman. Personally, I think the determinists make a compelling argument. one that is hard to refute. But I also think they leave out a key component of the causal chain, one that, in my opinion, is compatible with free will. When looking at Charles Whitman, the determinist might say, of course he was going to kill those people. Knowing his love of firearms learned from his father, his training as a Marine to identify an ideal firing position, the tumor pressing against his brain, changing his thoughts and feelings, his actions were certain, though not his choice. But that logic seems to remove Charles himself from his childhood, from his previous experiences, from the tumor itself growing in his brain, as if they're separate. I would argue all of those things are what make up Charles Whitman. The final variable in the long causal chain, not simply a tumor, but the totality of Charles himself. We are each the culmination of nature, nurture, and a near infinite number of events and other variables. We are the final cause in the decisions we make, because we are a manifestation of the causal chain itself. On its surface, determinism negates free will, but I think in reality, it actually provides a much more beautiful version of it. If you watched my last video, you know that we don't live in a vacuum. Our personalities, feelings, thoughts, abilities, our very identities, an incredible tapestry woven by the universe we inhabit, and the people that surround us. Our will never truly free, but instead beautifully entangled with everything we come in contact with. Our actions, perhaps predictable, or maybe even certain, but certainly our own. The jury is still out on free will. It's a question that's plagued great minds for generations, but I'm curious what you think. Leave a comment with your thoughts. I'd love to hear them.